All right, guys, in this video, I have to take some time to go over this ridiculous rumor about the PlayStation 5 that has recently come out. And the reason why I'm calling it ridiculous is not because this individual is completely wrong. In fact, I don't even believe that they're lying. It's mainly because some of the stuff they're saying just seems so kind of far-fetched. However, we do have a little bit of clarification coming from the individual about this rumor, and there have been a lot of people asking me to take some time to cover this and talk about it. And yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant only because it does kind of come off as a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But we have covered rumors like this in the past when it comes to the PS5, specifically thinking about those reports and those rumors that kind of surfaced that apparently the PS5 was having some serious overheating issues. And there were individuals who claimed to have inside information who were saying that Sony's kind of like in panic mode and they don't know what they're doing and they're just trying to rush the PS5 out the door. Yeah, and you can very clearly tell that those people were completely wrong, and they seemed wrong then, and they were just proven to be wrong in the future or later on once we actually learned more about the PS5. But this rumor, and as you can see here, you look at the title, it says PS5 to cost more than Xbox Series X while struggling more with multi platform games and performance, says Insider. Now, this individual is known as Dust Golem, and he's also known as Aesthetic Gamer over on Twitter. And we've talked about him before, actually, because this is the same individual who gives us a lot of information about Resident Evil, but also Silent Hill. So this is why I'm hesitant to just believe that they're a liar or they're just blatantly making this up. I don't think that's the case. And I do want to encourage anybody here to just, be cool, be chill. There's no reason to go hating on this individual. That is absolutely not why I'm making this video. I just want to point out some things here that are being said that they just don't seem real plausible to me, honestly. Some of the stuff that's said is, other stuff just kind of comes off as like, what? Like, where did you hear this? What developer is telling you this? So yeah, as you can see, there's a lot to go through here. So I'm going to kind of break it down through each section. And I want to give credit to WCCF Tech because they kind of compiled this all. It was actually coming from separate reset error posts. But yeah, let's just dive into it. So here's what he says, Dusk Golem. From some murmurings I've been hearing, I'll just say I suspect this topic is going to age interestingly when a few more details on both platforms are revealed. I mean this in a few ways, but to give the broadest idea, I'll just say the Xbox Series X is by far more powerful than the PlayStation 5 if we're just talking raw power. Multi-platform games will run better there. It is something people are going to have to prepare themselves for. Add to this, Microsoft are ready to lowball Sony when it comes to price. They can more easily make a sacrifice and get back profits from Game Pass and console sales than Sony can from that comparatively. Now, I've seen a lot of people kind of focusing on this paragraph here that he wrote out, and I'm not too focused on this because to me it just kind of reads as somebody giving their opinion, not necessarily inside information. He seems to just be pointing out stuff that kind of seems obvious, right? He talks about the Xbox Series X being the more powerful console. If we're just talking about raw power, we already know that as a fact. And then he goes on to say multi-platform games will run better there. It's something people are going to have to prepare themselves for. Not so sure I agree 100% with this, but we're going to get more into that as we go further down here. And then he talks about the idea of Microsoft being prepared to lowball Sony when it comes to the price. And this also makes sense to me. It's something that I've always considered when it comes to the Xbox Series X, and depending on how much Microsoft really cares about getting it out there. Again, it reads as kind of like a prediction, not necessarily inside information, although this is something we've heard in the past, so who knows? Maybe Microsoft is planning to just shock everybody and release a $399.99 Series X console. However, there's two things with that. One, I don't really know that it would matter nearly as much as some people might think, but on top of that, if this is the case, then what is the point of the Series S model? I thought that was the entire point of the Series S model, was to offer the lowest barrier to entry, the lowest possible price point. Anyway, moving on here, he goes on to say PS5 is easier to develop for overall, and Sony has very talented studios behind it that will get the most out of the PS5. That I have no doubts about either. But this topic is about how Microsoft will compete, so what I'm focused on. So I guess that's what he's saying he's focused on. But when it comes to cross platform games, they will end up performing a lot better on the Xbox Series X. Xbox Series X will have the tech advantage over PS5, and it will be more than marginal. Now, again, I don't know what this is supposed to mean. He's speaking here, and he does clarify this later on. I need to mention that. He does clarify that the only game he's really referring to here is Resident Evil 8 or Resident Evil Village. And I'm glad he clarified that, because he almost makes it sound like this is a factual thing he knows because he's seen multiple games or heard about multiple games. This is something that, in my opinion, no one really knows yet. I mean, you can make this assumption safely based off of what you see spec-wise on paper, but I don't necessarily know that this is going to end up being the truth when both of these consoles release. I just find it hard to believe, considering how close these consoles actually are in many ways, that there's going to be that noticeable of a difference. Moving right along here, the basic gist of what I've heard is the PS5 is really good to work on for exclusives, but in practice, these specs kind of get weird for multi-platform games. If multi-plat, the usage of PS5's, I'm assuming he's saying if the multi-platform games try to take advantage of the PS5's SSD system, it does help them out, but not to the fullest. And I've heard some developer friends talk a bit about the struggle PlayStation 5 has for 1080p games running 60 FPS still. While Xbox Series X doesn't have the same problem and can push above that even in most cases. Of course, this is a small selection of people I've talked to. There's more to it, but I hear something that's going to make this generation a bit interesting is the PS5 and Xbox Series X focus in other areas are going to make multi-platform games interesting this generation to the point we may actually see less of them and far more games coming to one platform or the other plus PC, as it's actually kind of hard to make a game optimal for both platforms due to where they're a bit differently focused. Now, this paragraph here has to be the most interesting, okay? Because he's talking about Resident Evil 8 here. That's what we need to clarify, or that's what he clarified later on, that this game he's talking about running at 1080p 60 FPS or struggling to do so on the PS5, he's actually talking about Resident Evil 8, and he does, I believe, clarify in a tweet that he's actually going based off of information from a couple of months ago. So in other words, he's talking about a game that's about a year away or won't be out till sometime next year and is clearly very unoptimized for the PS5. However, there are some really interesting things he brings up here that again, this is where it gets kind of ridiculous to me, because it's like, you expect me to believe that Capcom, their developers, are having a problem or having a struggle getting Resident Evil 8 running at 1080p 60 FPS on the PS5 when pretty much every Resident Evil game that is released on the PS4 Pro is close to 4K, or at least a higher resolution for sure than 1080p, and runs at 60 FPS no problems. This is where things get kind of ridiculous and kind of weird to me. It almost just sounds like the game is just completely unfinished and unoptimized. And he does go on to say that he believes that, yeah, that's the case. And we're going to read more about that. But to me, that's why I feel like this rumor shouldn't really be looked at as any indication of what to expect with either of these consoles, because, it's just like, it's an unoptimized game. Now, what is interesting to me is he talks about the idea that apparently the PS5 is a really good console to work with and the easier one to develop for when it comes to exclusive games, to whereas when it comes to multi-platform games, he's basically making it sound like developers that have talked to him are having issues, right? Where if they have to, and I don't understand how this is a thing. I know that from a architecture standpoint, the PS5 and the Series X are different, but it's not, and I could be wrong on this. I mean, I'm not a developer, so I haven't developed games for these consoles, so I could be completely wrong, but based off of what I know and based off of what I've seen, it doesn't seem to me that there's a vast difference between these consoles. Like, we're not looking at a difference between like the PS3 and Xbox 360 in terms of hardware architecture and how developers are going to have to basically learn a completely different system versus the other. That's my understanding of these consoles, architecturally speaking. But again, I'm not a developer, so I don't want to make it sound like I know. I don't want to say anything definitively here other than that some of this just reads to me like I really don't know if I can believe this because it just sounds like what we've been hearing a lot of Xbox fanboys say, which is you're going to see a huge difference with third-party games on the PS5 and the Series X. But he does also say here something that is also extremely obvious, which is you're going to see great things with PS5 exclusives, which is a big deal. That is a big deal. I'm tired of people kind of downplaying that like that's not a big deal or that's not a good reason to want to get a PS5. I'd say that's probably the strongest argument Sony has for why you want to get a PS5. But, it's understandable that people would be concerned when they hear this. It's like, what? 1080p 60 FPS? Like, how that's just completely ridiculous. But, he's saying that this generation is apparently going to be more interesting because developers may have to end up choosing. Again, this just sounds weird to me. They may have to end up choosing which console they want to make their game for. We may end up seeing more third-party exclusives. I do find the timing of this interesting, considering we are just coming off of the rumor that apparently Sony has approached literally every third-party publisher to try and strike some kind of exclusive deal. I mean, I'm not saying that gives credibility to what this individual is saying, but the timing of it is interesting. And I also don't understand, though, like, he makes it seem like developers will have an easier time making a game if it's just for the PS5 versus if they have to make it for the PS5 and an Xbox Series X. I really need somebody to explain this to me because I just don't get it. Now, I've heard that apparently this is possibly due to the geometry engine versus the amount of compute units that are in the Series X. We know the Series X has 52 compute units, which is significantly more than what the PS5 has, but the PS5 has the big advantage of how robust and refined its geometry engine is. And I've heard that in order for developers to really get the most out of their games, they need to be able to try to take advantage of that geometry engine, which I would assume takes some time to learn and figure out. And maybe in that sense, you could start to see a similarity between the PS5 and PS3. However, I'm not so sure because, again, we haven't really been hearing this from other developers. Other developers seem to, based off of everything we've seen and heard, seem to be having a fine time, optimizing their games for the PS5 versus the Series X. It could just very well be Capcom's RE engine, maybe they're making adjustments to it and it's causing problems. Maybe it's the developers, maybe the developers that are working over there at Capcom are having a more difficult time wrapping their head around the PS5 than most other developers. That's also a possibility. But yeah, it's very interesting. But let's continue on here. It says in a follow-up post, he clarified that he was referring mostly to Resident Evil Village, which is apparently struggling to get 1080p at 60 FPS per second on the PS5. That said, Dusk Golem also heard from other developer friends that this is probably going to be happening in other multi-platform games too. So he goes on to say, okay, so I guess I'll come clean here. I'm talking about Resident Evil Village. The game's terrible performance at the PS5 reveal event with the terrible frame rate present in the trailer was kind of the current status of the game on PS5 as of a few months ago. The thing is, apparently the game runs perfectly on the Xbox Series X. They've been having some troubles getting the frame rate stable on PS5, which as Sony had to rule, they had a rule to record PS5 event gameplay on PS5, and that led to the weird frames that they showed in the trailer. But it's running in the RE engine, and they'll be making more optimizations to take advantage of the game there. The price stuff is from different sources. I said that earlier, but I will clarify here. From what I've anecdotally heard from some other dev friends of mine, the Xbox Series X does have the advantage when it comes to multi-platform games on most fronts. Again, that doesn't read as a huge surprise. We all anticipate, because of those extra compute units, because of the T-flop advantage, there will be some type of advantage with multi-platform games on the Series X. But the big question is it really going to be as big as Dust Golem is making it sound here? He claims his developer friends are telling him like it's going to be a vast difference. Is it though? I'm not entirely convinced at all, honestly. But he says this is still anecdotal from the few people I've talked to on this topic, but I think some people should get ready for that, as it was consistent, at least with everyone I've talked to, in making games for the PS5 and Series X. So yeah, let's just finish this off by going over to his Twitter account, where he does, give us even more clarification here. Right here, he's basically complaining that people are misquoting him, and so he's going to tweet to clarify. He was saying that everything he was saying on Reset Era about RE8's performance was from a few months ago on PS5. That is true. And he even said, I also know Capcom has some very talented people. The engine is very customizable. And he says it will probably be working perfectly by launch, but people are trying to say that I'm saying the game won't work well on launch. And it's not, I'm glad he clarifies this, but I think he should understand that, the way he worded his original post over on Reset Era, it really kind of made it seem like we should brace ourselves for an absolute disaster of a game running on the PS5. That's not what I said. And he goes on to say that he suspects the game will not be running at true 4K 60 FPS. His prediction is that it will be some kind of upscaled 4K at 60 FPS, but native 4K at 60 FPS on the Series X. That's just his educated guess. And to be fair, I think that is kind of what everybody somewhat expects. It depends on how many extra bells and whistles the game is going to have when it comes to ray tracing and particle effects and all this extra stuff that takes up resources. If Resident Evil 8 is going to utilize some of that to some extent, I would expect a struggle hitting native 4K 60 FPS, of course. And maybe that is the advantage you would get with the Series X and those extra compute units. But that's a far cry from 1080p, the idea of the PS5 struggling to hit 1080p 60 FPS. And this is just unfortunate because obviously there's going to be people who are running with this and they're going to use this against PlayStation and PlayStation fans. This is the wrong article, actually. I'm going to make a separate video about that. And to me, it all seems a little bit ridiculous, but other parts of it do seem just kind of like stuff we've already known, or educated guesses that pretty much anybody who's in the loop would make, such as, multi-platform games are going to run or look better potentially on the Series X. The idea that Microsoft could potentially try to undercut Sony. I mean, guys, there's a reason why both Sony and Microsoft have yet to reveal the price of these consoles. It's because they're both afraid that one or the other is going to try to do that to them. And, Microsoft may be the one to do it. We don't know. But overall, I don't buy into, I don't want to say that. I don't want to say, because that makes it sound like this person is trying to make stuff up. I don't think he's making stuff up. I think he just kind of said some things in a way that got, the way you read it, it reads like fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And if you look at the overall clarification, he's simply just saying this is what he's heard from developers about Resident Evil 8, is that apparently they are having a little bit of a struggle. Now, the only thing I'm really interested in here, truly, that I don't want to believe it because it doesn't sound like good news if it's true, but I would just love to hear more developers or some insiders come out here and talk about this, where he's making it sound like developers that are making multi-platform games are having a struggle optimizing these games for the PS5 versus the Series X. That just seems so weird to me because everything we've heard about the PS5 is how easy it is to develop for. And then he also kind of mentions how that's only the case for apparently exclusive games, but not multi-platform games. It's very confusing to me. So I would like further clarification on that. whether it's from him or other developers or whatever, or people who are just much more knowledgeable about this. Because that just seems kind of weird to me. And I hope that's not true because, yeah, that could be a serious issue for the PS5 in the long run. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. So, yeah, that's going to do it for this video, guys. I had to take some time to acknowledge this rumor because I know there's some people who think that I was just going to ignore it because, it might be bad news for PS5. But no, I just think that we have to take everything, just like when we hear the good rumors and the good leaks, we have to take everything with a grain of salt. We won't really know anything for sure until we see it for ourselves in front of our eyes. When it comes to Resident Evil 8 and potentially other multi-platform games, yeah, that's exactly what we have to do. We have to just take it with a grain of salt and see what ends up happening. So that does it for the video. Let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. Leave it a like if you did enjoy it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload. And feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.